Okay, so let's take a look at the next subsection under cultural and psychiatric diagnosis, and that's cultural formulation. So, at its highest level, cultural formulation is about pulling in those cultural and social aspects into your assessment and make sure they're a part of your assessment. That's to me like sort of the highest, most simplified version of that definition. Um, I like that they added this in here, and I sort of created I bolded this here so you could just try to lay it out so it's a little more clearly. So these are elements of a of incorporation of cultural identity into your assessment. So different things to ask. And some of these may be um, more obvious and more routine in people's assessments, but others may not, like asking about religious affiliation or spirituality, or asking, sort of asking questions related to socioeconomics and how they view their state, their place in the socioeconomic system. Okay, migrant or residential status, um, uh, you know, and in terms of gender identification, sexual orientation. Um, Obviously, um, clients aren't necessarily comfortable with like, okay, what's your sexual orientation, right? It's really not necessarily the way to go about it. But keeping that in mind, to just try to work towards getting to know that client as that individual, and just being sort of tuned into what may or may not surface in terms of their sexual and or gender identity. All right, that's my take on it anyway. And to that point, you see here, I added this. Some clients are at least in my experience, they very much want to share their identity with you. They want to know what your identity is, and frankly, a lot of times they want to see your reaction to their identity. Um, and don't necessarily say that overtly, but sometimes you might pick up on that. So other clients may be very, very slow to share that identity information um, for similar reasons. They're not sure how you're going to react, and if it's going to create a reaction in you, even a very subtle one, that may prompt them to be uncomfortable for them and erode the therapeutic relationship you're trying to build. Okay. The other thing I added about immigration and people from other cultures. One of the, and certainly for people who've come, more recently here in this culture, have come grown up in other cultures, or spent the first part of their lives in another culture, and they're here, and that's part of what's happening in their lives. That's cause for struggle. The other thing that comes up a lot that's not necessarily, that I don't think was mentioned directly in the book, so I wanted to call it out, was in family work, working with families who the parents are um, the first generation of immigrants here. They grew up and maybe spent a good chunk of their lives in a very different culture, and but their children only know this culture, U.S. culture, and that alone can be a great source of distress within a family, and to the point where they may need professional support in navigating that. So I just wanted to call that out. Um, the other thing is that there are times where a um, a client may have a very strong group identification that's not necessarily tied to race or ethnicity. And the best, or well, not the best example, but the example that most immediate comes to mind for me are military veterans. Whenever I've worked with military veterans, and this is more so many of you, or some of you may do placements in within the Veterans Administration, which I love that that we've been involved in that as a program for some time. Um, that may come up less, I'm not sure, but where it definitely comes up is if you have um, people who are military veterans come to you in the context of a private practice that's not directly affiliated with the VA or military health service institution. So what I mean by that, like there are veterans who um, you know leave service, they have veteran status, but they end up getting their health insurance or their primary health insurance to an employer or their spouse's employer, or they're dependent on another insurance policy. So they're seeing you, they're a veteran, but they're seeing you through a commercial health plan, or they're on they're within a Medicare or public Medicaid public health plan. Either way, you're not necessarily, you may encounter them and you're not in a military or veteran health setting. And my experience with that is they very much want to know if you're a veteran, and if you're not, that's a challenge for you, and for me. So building trust with someone who identifies as a military veteran, and you're not a member of that group yourself, that can be a larger sort of a wider bridge to, or a longer bridge to cross in terms of building something up with them. Okay. So anyway, I added this image here for you. This is from the it's an image from the NIH website on cultural respect, and then there's sort of a subset of there's a sub website within that called Think Cultural Health. A lot of good content there if you're interested, or you're taking a policy class and looking for content to write a paper, do a presentation on cultural aspects of healthcare, and being culturally competent in healthcare from the NIH perspective. Anyway, so there's if you're interested in that. But the reason why I added the image was I thought this addressing framework, which, and just to add, obviously I didn't make this. The credit for the addressing framework itself goes to Ohio State University. That there were researchers there that created that framework. So just to give proper credit. But anyway, I just thought it's a nice thumbnail image to sort of summarize, and that's not necessarily a complete exhaustive list. So just know that. But it is a sort of a good list that's relatively comprehensive about the categories of social identity. So that's why I included it. Hope you find it helpful. Cultural concepts of distress. Again, you can read this here. The one thing I will say about cultural concepts of distress and these, how these may manifest in an individual or in your clients, can be compounded if they've got a chronic condition by history that may be a behavioral health chronic condition, but it doesn't necessarily have to be a behavioral health chronic condition, and they may have multiple chronic conditions. They may have depression and an autoimmune disorder. In integrated health, we talk a lot. Of course, we talk a lot about that concept of compound conditions, very much like compound stressors or compound social determinants of health. They have a compound effect. The whole that may be greater than the sum of the parts, meaning having those two things, the stress of it may be more than just 1 + 1 = 2. If that makes sense. Psychosocial stressors and cultural vulnerability and resistance. I think I didn't really add, I just pulled out what I thought were the highlights there. Obviously, making sure that we're human beings. So we are going to overlay to some extent our own context with our clients. That's just a human thing. So we just need to be aware of it and sort of just make sure we're navigating that effectively. Okay. I just added this sort of opening line here: strive to be conscious about differences between you and the client in ways that include, that are not necessarily limited to. Again, this is a list from the DSM, cultural, language, education, social status. That is not a complete list. That's just what the DSM listed in there. Okay. And so being aware of how you are positioned, as you see down here, right? They use the word clinician. Sorry, that part is me. Consider how you as the clinician, i.e. social worker, are positioned socially and perceive each other, meaning you and the client, in terms of social categories. So just being in awareness of that. Some of your clients, there may not come up as a major thing. Sometimes your clients are very much like you. Other times your clients are really different than you in lots of different ways. And just recognizing that there's a variance there, and for clients that are more different than you, your challenge may be greater, and certainly your responsibility. At least this is my opinion, not the DSM. Your responsibility is greater because your work is that much more important to make sure you're connecting with that client, or doing your best to do so. So I think you read the rest there. That's just sort of pulling out the what I thought were the most salient points, and just a little additional context for you in this section here on cultural formulation.